Hello, Dennis.
Oh, hello. I had it on mute. How are you?
Very good, very good. Thank you very much.
And what is your name?
Diego.
Okay. And I'm not sure if anybody else is involved in the call.
From our side, no.
Okay. From my side, I don't see anybody else right now either. Bill might join in. I don't know.
I think he's here. Yeah.
Oh, he is here. Okay.
I am here. Yes.
Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, you have an interesting group. I know that when things happen, certain groups or issues end up being marginalized. And right now with climate change itself as an issue is becoming marginalized with people worrying about other issues. Right now they're pushing fears of inflation, shortages, all sorts of turmoil. And it's, now we've got shortages of gas, energy's an issue. We can't go over and do that. But I think that's somewhat what's behind what you have organized.
Yes. So let me start a little bit on kind of speaking on the origins. So well, first let's just let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Diego de Leon. I'm Mexican, although I'm currently living in New York City because of work purposes. But I'm the founder and the head of an organization called Queers for Climate, which looks at the intersection of climate change and the LGBTQ plus rights. And we are a fairly new organization. We started it 2 years ago in 2019 in September, when the UN Secretary General calls countries, businesses, and civil society in general to step up their commitments towards carbon neutrality. As you know, there was this IPCC report that said that if we needed to peak emissions basically by 2030 and reach carbon neutrality by 2050, in order to prevent an increase of above 1.5 degrees, the average temperature of the Earth. So, a lot of countries came forward and increased their climate ambition. Unfortunately, this hasn't been enough, but, there's been this wake up also from the business sector and civil society. We've seen more and more younger voices such as Greta Thunberg come out and speak on behalf of future generations and saying, this is the biggest challenge that we have as humanity, and we need to we really do need to put a lot of attention, but particularly action towards fighting climate change. And in this movement, something that I realize, and I am a climate professional. I have throughout my work, I work on climate negotiations and climate policy with various stakeholders. But I realized that there was one voice missing, and that was from the LGBTQ community. And as a member of that community, I, first of all, I realized, how does this actually affect us, and what can we do? So that's when I started doing a little bit of research and reaching out to some colleagues that are expert on gender issues, that are expert on climate issues, and really trying to understand. And we identified that there was a lot of information out there that was not necessarily, connected, but that, individual efforts had been done in order to try to understand this intersection. And what we did was kind of trying to bring these pieces together and create this platform where we can, share the knowledge and the content that exists on this matter and try to create a little bit more conscious about it. So that's kind of like the background. In 2 minutes, who am I and what are we doing?
All right. What made you think that the LGBTQT plus community needed a separate organization?
So there's a lot of information regarding, for example, the impact of climate change on other vulnerable communities, such as people with disability, women, children, But there was this, there was this lack of information, and what we identify is just that it's not visible enough. As you said, sometimes it's marginalized, and therefore it's not part of the main discourse. But unfortunately, climate change, although it affects us all, every person in the earth, because we're part of this ecosystem, it doesn't affect us the same way, such as, also like racial injustice, or other type of air pollution and biodiversity loss. It's not biodiversity loss, for example, it's much more an issue for indigenous communities than it's for someone living in a city, right? Just because of the degree of exposure and the dependency that they have on that biodiversity, or perceived or direct, because we all depend on the biodiversity. But if a species go extinct, a person in the city might not be affected as much as an indigenous community that might see that plant or animal not only as a source of resources, but a spiritual. It also helps them fulfill their spiritual needs, or their cultural needs, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of research and a lot of information on the differentiated impacts of climate change on these different groups. And then it was kind of asking them, does this actually matter to us, and are we affected? And the response was, yes, we are affected differently from other groups, because of the degree of marginalization that we face, and the key issues such as access to some type of to health services, or the fact that you cannot have the full set of rights because your unions are not legally recognized, and things like that. That then, when you move it into the context of climate change, you identify that we are affected. So we are seeing an increase. One very good example is we're seeing a very large increase on extreme climate events such as hurricanes, tornadoes, et cetera, et cetera. So if your community does not, your marriage or your union is not legally recognized, unfortunately, when you face the losses provoked by climate change, sometimes you don't have the capacity to access to insurances, or some type of security that or sometimes there's extreme cases you cannot even recover the body of your loved ones, just because you're not legally recognized as the partner of that person. So that's kind of like the immediate examples, but there's a lot of research also showing LGBT people, especially when intersected with the race or the color of their skin, they lived in certain communities where the impacts of climate change are experienced disproportionately. The lack of medical services during emergencies for vital issues such as HIV treatments, that's our issues that are particularly impacting our community, and that they're not necessarily taken into account in UN negotiations, or this type of agreement, or climate policies, national, or the NDCs, like all this action that is being taken. That none of them ever consider the potential impacts on the LGBTQ community.
Okay, are you trying to help your community understand more what to do, or are you combining that with trying to fight climate change, knowing what it's doing to your community?
It's a great question, and we're kind of both. First, it's a two-way work. So one is helping the broader audience, so everybody working on climate policy or working on climate issues, to others, to see that it's important to not overlook the impact of climate change in the LGBT community, so that when you talk about a national climate policy, or you're talking about climate action or raising ambition, you add those both voices and you consider them within your plans, action programs, or whatever you're doing. And that not only applies for government, but also businesses. So there's a lot of businesses that are during pride, or that are trying to be more inclusive in their workforce, et cetera, to also acknowledge and kind of combine their green efforts and their human rights effort, and really understand that it's social justice and climate justice are two faces of the same coin, and that it's important to take into account all voices. So that's kind of like the outreach that we do, but also on the inside, help our community understand why this is an issue for us too. Like, it's not an issue, climate change is not, it's an LGBT issue also. And also, how can we contribute, what type of actions and commitments can we do, how can we change our lifestyles so that we are more, that we're proactively against climate change. So it kind of works in both ways. So we're trying to educate ourselves and trying to take a more proactive action, but also educate at the outside. And here I would like to really appreciate the effort of this interview, because this is the type of things that we thrive on, and helping other people understand why this is an issue for us, and why should everyone care.
Very good. I think you're doing a very good job explaining it. I'm assuming anyone can join the organization.
Absolutely. I mean, of course, we're focused on LGBT, but the LGBT movement has always been greatly supported by our allies, all the women, men, regardless of their social, economic status, their background, their race, their whatever. They're part, like and that's why sometimes they tend to use the LGBTQ plus population, but I rather use community, because at the end we're part, we're your neighbors, we're your brothers, sisters, whatever, and we're part of the same society. So it's not, I don't like segregating anything.
I got a question for you. We started this, and we are fairly new at the Global Conscience is about a year old. And I look at the future, and it doesn't seem too bright for us. Do you have any idea, where do you think things will be in 5 years, 10 years, for what the way they're working now? I guess I'm just wondering what you see the future.
That's a hard question. I can speak as as a climate change professional, and also as a LGBT advocate. So as a climate change, I wouldn't say expert, because there's always room for more knowledge, and there's people that know much more. But my hope is that there is a technological break that could potentially mitigate the action. And I really do hope that that we're able to that technological breakout, whatever it is, it's inclusive, it's accessible, and doesn't, it's not like, unfortunately, like the oil and gas industry, where it feeds the energy needs of the world, but it's on the hands of it's on the very few hands have the control of it, and they're making sure that that we don't move away from using fossil fuels. And I think that's kind of one of the largest problems that we have, that there's this very tight and very well-financed interest that doesn't really help move forward climate action. And that's why from my perspective, having a technology come through that, at the end, it's a more cheaper, safer, and wider way of bringing energy to the people. And I do have big emphasis on energy, because at the end, that's where most of emissions comes. But there's also needs to be breakthrough innovations in agriculture, and so that we don't we don't take too much forest land, et cetera, et cetera. Like yes, first of all, we need a systemic change. But I think one of the key topics and the way forward is through energy. But there needs to be that, because otherwise, if we don't change our way of living, and that's, sometimes we put a lot of burden on individual choices, but once you see the data, you see that, it's 100 companies are responsible for 60% of global emissions. So, it's also an equity justice issue. That's kind of like where we at and where we go. I mean, it's a very gloom perspective. I agree on that. um I myself try to remain hopeful, that something will come through, but it's every time we have less and less time, and it's becoming a more complicated issue every day. Um, but I remain hopeful that technology and will prevail and come through. As an LGBT advocate, I think that especially from a couple of years on, civil society has really uptake the climate, and they're really demanding for change. Um, Unfortunately, I don't think that it still needs to be, more people need to be involved, so that whenever we vote, or we, as particularly in democratic countries, that the votes really reflect, an ambitious climate plan and ambitious actions, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a movement that started, and just like other really big movements, in its moment, the ending segregation in the US, or ending the apartheid in South Africa, and other major social changes in recent times, I think it's possible. I don't know. I don't know if that answered the question.
Well, I personally, I'm looking at it, I don't see how we can solve the problem. I think we're sort of already, we're so far along that I don't see how we can stop it right now in the next 15, 20 years. I think that we're going to continue to get worse and worse, and we could see days of 150 to 160 degrees, maybe in Canada. I guess we had 138 degree day in Canada. So just start thinking about all these weather phenomena that we're starting to have. The future doesn't look too bright.
Absolutely. And I think that's also important. I mean, there's this big discourse on mitigation and, getting emissions, but that's why I'm also a big advocate in personally about adaptation. I think that, and that's particularly there is, a big, we've tried to make a big focus for LGBT rights on adaptation, because that's going to be such a big issue. So for example, statistically, the person that faces the largest degree of discrimination, and that has the highest level of vulnerability whenever there's a displacement, are transgender people. So they usually, and it's a very sad statistic, but the possibility that they will actually survive the way the move, it's very slim. So that's type of issues that we need to start taking into account, because we are going to start seeing a big increase on people displaced because of climate change, because their crops completely withered, because they lost their house to a hurricane, because all this, it got flooded or whatever happened. And we have to be conscious that it's not just displacing a group of people, but within that group of people, everybody has, or there's different parts to it, and each one requires different type of attention. So it's important to have an integrated approach, so that you're able to secure the rights of every group. But yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that we don't focus that much in adaptation or resilience, and that's going to be an increasingly, and I think that in a couple of years, COPs and these UN conferences will start shifting towards mitigation into more adaptation, and trying to get more funds, and trying to get more, because it's just an inevitable an inevitable future. Absolutely, unfortunately, but I agree.
Yeah, I think I'm seeing more and more scientists that are getting a little edgy that we're not really doing what we should be or could be doing. Sort of Greta Thunberg is sort of saying the same thing. It's a lot of talk and not a lot of action. So I think that's what we're also worrying about. The way everything, it seems like the solutions are fairly straightforward, but there are people who benefit from not having them put in place, so it's sort of scary to know how far they're willing to go in terms of the damage that they're willing to cause in order to make a little bit of money. So yeah, it's a real mixture. You're a bilingual organization or website. Are you now based in New York City?
Yes, so I was because of work. I mean, I'm Mexican, and my hometown is Guadalajara in Mexico. But because of work, of my main work as a climate policy consultant, I was living in Mexico City, and also and now I've relocated recently to New York. And I mean, the team works remotely, so it's good that we don't necessarily need to be based in a single area or a single country. But yeah, I mean, something that as a Mexican national, most of the information out there is mostly in English, and that represents a barrier. So if we're trying to be more of an inclusive organization, we really do try to open this information for the rest of the people. It's challenging time wise and resources, but it's one of our core principles, in the sense of trying to allow the access for information as much as large as possible. And of course, in the future, as the organization grows and we're able to secure more resources, we want to translate the information into other languages. But yeah, it's kind of inclusivity should not only be based on physical characteristics, but also cultural, our languages, our word communication, and not really try our best to not exclude anyone. But that, yeah, because that's always a challenge, and being a Mexican based organization, of course we need to be in Spanish, but also again try to reach other audiences in English.
Okay, are you doing any translations from English into Spanish?
Yes, so our website is fully bilingual. All the parts are translated, and then something that we've been working on slowly but surely is the information that we find, articles and all that, trying to find ways to translate them, one at a time, but trying to really find ways to access that information, or at least the key content regarding LGBT issues to be in Spanish too. And
Okay.
we also feature pieces in Spanish or English. Mm-hmm.
All right, and you are intending to be a worldwide organization?
Yes, I mean, we say, because our through social media, we really, and it's been very interesting and gratifying to find people reaching out, even from parts like from Africa, specifically from Uganda, where unfortunately being a homosexual is criminalized. So they, of course, they remain anonymous, and we don't provide any much details on their location or anything, but we've found out about this group of people that live in like LGBTQ communities, that are doing climate action, and we try to feature. We've also been approached by a lot of indigenous people that are either gay, lesbians, bisexuals, or transgender, and they share kind of the work that they're doing. And it's very interesting to see this intersection, because they it's again, it's an intersection that you wouldn't really think that exists. And yeah, we acknowledge that the percentage of the population is smaller in comparison, but it's interesting to hear their stories and to see the action, and especially for Indigenous people that usually have a closer relationship with nature and the land that they live in, and then they add, being a LGBT person and sometimes being discriminated in their communities, but they still, uphold and appreciate their heritage and try to, live a lifestyle, that represents their culture. So it's very interesting to hear those stories and see the type of things that they're doing. So that's why we're proud to say, the global organization, in a sense that although we don't necessarily have representation, physical or official, but we're open to hearing stories from all over the world, and not a particular country or region.
Okay, and then what are the main activities or actions or events that you are working on?
So during the pandemic, unfortunately, we had to scale down a little bit our operations, just because it was a hard time for everyone, but or it is, it's still very hard. But basically, as I mentioned at the beginning, we strive to be a platform rather. So we are not necessarily generating the content, but rather serving as a hub and then distributing. So we have we harness the potential of social media in order to share the stories that we get and trying to bring more attention. So we have Instagram, we have Twitter, which is the kind of the channels that we use to share. Of course, we would love to be way more proactive, but again, because of COVID, it's been harder. But that's kind of the aim. Also, identifying like articles, stories run in the media, report like official reports and all this type of information, and storing them in kind of a electronic library. Where they're free access, and when we find articles that are charged, that are part of a journal or something, we speak to the author and try to reach an agreement so that we can actually share that particular article, and that type of information. There's all like syllabus from some colleges that have taught on the matter. Official reports from the U.S. government, from the UN that speak on these issues, and that's kind of like the main. So we see ourselves as kind of like the hub, one-stop shop where you can go and really get all the information that you need in order to share, and you do your own activities. And of course, we try to promote those activities, and create kind of a history of everything that's going on, so that people see that it's an ongoing issue. It's something that's alive and growing, and we at the end, our organization is as strong as our partners and groups are doing. So that's kind of what we strive for.
Okay, and I'm assuming you're a nonprofit.
Yeah. We are registered in Mexico.
Okay. And how difficult is it to get funding to keep the organization going?
I mean, right now I'm personally, I've kind of it hasn't been a very expensive operation for the model that we're operating. And it's we volunteer our time and our effort, most of like the personnel, and we cover the essentials. Of course, we are looking always to receive donations there to expand our operations. We have a small fund that we're trying to grow in order to start doing more activities, but it's been kind of a base of base, and we really haven't really tried to do a funding strategy, just because right now our cost is very manageable. And, again, we're more of an information platform rather than taking action. But as we grow and hopefully, start devoting more attention and time to growing the organization, then of course we would do a proper funding strategy. But as for right now, the operation cost is quite low and very manageable, in the sense of running the website, the content mostly free, and it's not, we're not necessarily traveling or doing other type of activities, and just having this small fun. And we that we receive some funding funding requests from us to us, like they're asking us for resources, and we use that little fund that was made up of a series of shows that a group of drag queens in Toronto did, and part of the profits that they did, they shared with us. So we use that fund, and we managed from there to try and have a little bit of capital. But it's not a finance intensive organization, so we that's how we operate more of an voluntary, low cost.
All right, very good. And how do you reach new I don't know, members, followers?
Through social media, and to be honest, they reach to us. Like they know about the webpage, they've heard either one of our newsletters, or that they just come out and they approach us, and they're like, hey, I want to share my story. And we're actively searching in social media about posts, and using hashtags, trying to identify ways of finding these people. And they approach us, or we approach them and ask them, hey, can I share this post, and like repost it in our Instagram or our Twitter. And that's kind of how we grow. And then they tell their friends, and we've been slowly growing our follower list.
How many followers
And
do you have?
registering on the webpage also, we receive almost daily requests for being added to the mailing list and things like that.
How big is your mailing list?
I think right now it's about like 600 people, the mailing list, but on Instagram we're about, we've approached 1,000. So it's a large crowd. I mean, of course it can be bigger, and we're hoping now that COVID is passing to really step up our efforts and get a larger following.
Okay.
Okay, and I just wanted to, when did you get started? Was it 2018 or 19?
19, yeah, September 2019.
Okay, and could you talk just a couple of minutes about what you were doing with the United Nations?
So, I mean, I personally, I worked for the as a climate advisor for the Mexican government, but that I mean, I of course do not want to. I mean, that kind of separate, my work, my day job from CRISPR Climate, which is kind of my night job. But with the UN, so through, using people that I personally met during negotiations and all that, and that I know that are part of the community, like really speaking to them and understanding and trying to leverage a little bit more the position, bringing LGBT issues, and also speaking to other delegates and countries and saying, this is what I do, but I also have this organization, and if there's any information that we can provide in order to advance this agenda in UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So it's kind of using the contacts that we have professionally in order to let them know what we're doing. And if it's of their interest and, it doesn't represent any type of conflict or anything, then, trying to approach them and helping them understand, why is this an important issue. And we also had in partnership with the Mexican government. Separately, we had a couple of um, kind of virtual conferences, workshops, where one of them we had people from the Mexican government, from a lot of this NGOs that work directly with the UN system, like Outright and the Fletcher University, and like different political leaders, the UK embassy in Mexico, to talk about these issues. We also had, one with civil society. So we're trying to push, this agendas, so that they're uptaken by our leaders, and really, hopefully take action. That's kind of what we try to also do, kind of a bit of a lobbying effort. Of course, we don't have the oil company money, but that's kind
Nobody
of
does.
using our personal connections and our the goodwill of some groups that we know that are interested in these topics, in order to like further advance, and especially with NGOs that are part of the ECOSOC and have the observance status and things like that, that say like, hey, yeah, I'll provide the information, we can provide supporting, just help us bring up these issues when you're in official conferences and things like that.
Are you still working for the Mexican government?
No.
Okay. All right. So you now are independent.
Yeah. Well, I work for another company, but it's like I said, I separate very much my, just like, it's just and I'm whenever I'm as a consultant, I always have certain independence. I'm not part of the organization. I never speak on behalf of the organization. So right now I would say, I'm speaking on behalf of Queers for Climate, but acknowledging that I've had other responsibilities that have helped me understand and make some personal connections that then I later use to show the work and try to find partnerships and things like that.
All right, very good. I am out of questions. Is there anything else you'd like to say that I didn't ask you about?
Well, I don't know, Bill, if you have other question or.
No, I don't really. You have a 600 mailing list. We're trying to figure out how we can monetize our list that we have. There is a company that we're going to be part of partnership with that isn't a nonprofit. They're for profit, but they've been selling a list of environmental people, and they don't have that big a list, but they charge a pretty good sum of money for it. So I'm thinking somehow, is there potential for us to possibly work with some of our partners, get their list and combine one big list that might bring income in for our partners and ourselves too, obviously. So I'm thinking about that possibility. Now, these lists, 600 names isn't really big, but if you take that and we get 10, 15, 25,000 through a number of lists, and these are all prime people that are very interested in the environment, it could be a good list that might be able to sell and bring in income. So just keep that in mind. The idea came up today, talking with you and some other people today about some other things.
No, absolutely. I mean, count with us, and we're so happy and proud of being part. We haven't really leveraged on that because, again, it's been complicated for me personally to keep up with everything, but we are, now that I'm in a more stable position, really uptaking this and scaling it up, and we want to feature much more our that we're part of Global Conscious, and we're one of your ambassadors, which for us it's really an honor, and thank you very much for this approach and inviting us over, and really to also share more of the content that you generate and be way more proactive than we have been. And yeah, definitely work together. I mean, at the end, we're all in the same boat, and it's important to share the resources that we have. Kind of Queer for Climate. I mean, it's ideally in a future stage, it's an organization that, it's able to stand by itself and really grow and have, a brand. But as for right now, we want to see ourselves as a convening platform where we can feature the work that others are doing too. And so we're very happy to support that type of efforts.
Good, you're doing a good job, and
Thank you.
especially for you don't have much funding, and you're doing it without much funding, which is pretty good, because I've been funding it myself, and I know it's expensive to do all these things.
Yeah. Yeah, we find creative ways.
Well, you're doing a good job, and I appreciate you taking the time to do an interview with us.
No. The pleasure is mine. The pleasure is mine.
Great.
And just to say, that we're the last I would say that you were asking then is just, that always think about, is what we're doing inclusive, and of course, we never can. We wish we could. I think we share the same wish that we could incorporate every voice, but it's hard. But just to think that, our actions go way beyond, that when you see a statistic of, a hurricane hit and, 100 people lost their homes, thinking about, of that 100 people, 50% of them were women. Probably 10% of them, or 10 were LGBT. 5 of them were disabled, and really try to think about, putting faces and into those numbers, and trying to understand that, the differentiated impacts of climate change, and that, it's already such a complicated issue, and of course we don't want to overcomplicate it, but it's important to really understand that this, that we all have common responsibilities, but differentiated impacts, and therefore we have to act accordingly. That's kind of like the main message that we want to leave, and that we, at least the thing that we can do is provide the resources and the tools to address these issues.
Okay.
Very good. Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you again for your time.
No,
Yes,
my
thank
pleasure.
you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so
All
much.
right. Now.
Have a great day.